All right, here we are looking at Seljuk, or the after view, as it were. Probably too high. Okay. Um, this is the latest in the Levian campaign series, a series that I've totally bought into in terms of, yes, this is something I really asked for and handles uh, medieval era operational conflict in a way that I wouldn't have even imagined possible. Um, and that's the first thing. It's like, yeah, it's covering stuff that I really want it covered, not just the battles. Battle after battle under a given series, you can just keep hitting them, and they kind of start flowing together. The operational stuff um, generally tends to provide a richer room for innovations, etc., in terms of how to handle the specifics of the situations. And so, I think it's a richer ground to plow than just coming out with battle after battle, most of which we wouldn't recognize. Although I would like one on Manzikert from here. I mean, that's one that I recognize, and I would gladly have, a boxed set of 4 to 6 games that covered key battles of this era. I was actually kind of hoping Cataphract would do that, but it's an earlier period. Um, this one in particular, the subject matter is probably the subject matter that I would have chosen second out of everything that's projected for this. The first being the 100 Years' War stuff, because that I saw as kind of the heart of like the chevauché that Nevsky expresses, that this game expresses. Some of the later ones, a little less so. There are aspects of this one that I really, really like. It's an asymmetrical situation. The Byzantines have a big force. They can go in and they can stop. They can stop the Seljuks pretty much wherever they like. But that has a corollary to it. And that is that I'm not sure the Seljuks have enough places, enough pressure points, enough ways to slip around that they can really push the Byzantines as hard as they did historically. This could be that I'm just not getting some aspect of the strategy to the game. It's quite possible. In the beginning of the grand campaign, the first year, whatever, and I guess this probably happens with most of the first year scenario, with most of the 1 year scenarios. The forces aren't that disparate. The Seljuks have enough force that they can kind of threaten a possible attack on the Byzantine army, and that they can use that threat to enable the raids that they want to do. Everything in this series has an issue for me, which is that you have to pre-plan so much. You have to be so aware of everything that's going on in it, that it's very, very easy to make mistakes. And I feel like that just cuts across the board in every Levian campaign game. And it makes them very, very difficult to play. In the case of this one, it's raised, the ante is raised by a combination of the terrain, the distance from the seats to the borders, but most of all, that asymmetrical nature, what the Seljuks are trying to do in terms of raiding versus that massive Roman force. That massive Roman force can be, I don't know, especially after you get past that, after you get past a 1 year scenario. Once you move into the second year or whatever, it becomes harder and harder because the Roman or Byzantine force is able to just sort of snowball in size and get more powerful. And the Seljuk can get more stuff on the board, but they have a really hard time. The peculiarities of what they're trying to do make it very, very difficult for them to launch the raids that they want consistently year after year. And they have a requirement that forces them to accomplish X amount of damage against the Byzantine territory every year. And that requirement goes up higher and higher. As far as I can tell, it seems to me, it gets harder and harder to do. Yes, half of what you did the last year stays on the map, but that's the half that you can get to always. Because unless maybe I'm doing that wrong. I don't know who. Let's see. Let's make sure. But I believe it's the player who's affected who can remove stuff. Back here. Yeah, you remove your enemy's markers, which means that the border areas that were easiest to raid, to ravage, are going to remain ravaged. And that's perfectly reasonable, but the problem with that is that it forced the Seljuk to go into their deepest part without any additional supplies or whatever coming to them. Now they have a capability which allows them to move to get a supply source a little closer. They're going to be cut off because they're not going to have castles, etc. Now they can actually kind of cover that, I guess. I didn't try this. Maybe if I played it a third time I would, which is trying to cover your entryway by leaving lords behind to bypass castle or fortifications and allow you to trace supply back. But then you're not going to have the big force that's going to have enough carts and everything to get your supply. I am just finding that I can't figure out what the solution is to make the Seljuks able to compete accurately. Now, I've only played it twice. That's certainly not enough to say, oh my God, the game's unbalanced. But I'll tell you this much, it's a lot harder to play the Seljuk side than it is to play the Roman side. If I were to introduce Levy and Campaign to somebody with this one, I would definitely be taking the Seljuks to try to, unless somebody insisted, like a friend of mine did in Vietnam, that he wanted to be the U.S. He did the same in Korean War too. He wanted to be the NATO forces, and we played that one twice. Now, I'm convinced the U.S. can't win Vietnam, but that's okay. But in the Korean War, I know that the U.S. can win. But he walked away after 2 losses, convinced that they can't possibly win. And I'm like, you should let me be them. I'd show you. But I don't have any kind of feeling like that with this game. Other games of the Levy and Campaign, I don't remember walking away with such a feeling of, oh, it's unbalanced, or it might be. This one I have the fear that it may be. Or at the very least, the burden is so heavy on the Seljuk player. Let's talk about components a little bit, although there's not much to say bad about them. I'm trying to think of something. This is, this series gets GMT's love. Obviously the armored box, the smooth, beautiful boards that they're putting out now. I got one little criticism, which is the calendar on the boards. It tends to get too crowded. That's true with every Levian campaign. These things really thick stock, you know, like Worthington's boards in terms of what they are. Perfectly, you know, just fantastic pieces of, for all the lords and everything. You got your wooden cylinders, and the counters are thick, decent quality. Everything's good there. Tons and tons of wooden pieces, tons and tons of counters for markers and whatnot. There is a little bit of trouble distinguishing colors with the large mix of different colors that are used for the thematic units in the game, which is one of the additions here. I didn't find them. They make the Seljuk job harder, and I don't know, something like removing them might be enough to give them, you know, to get, or not let them be effective the way that they are. But on the other hand, they're doing their historical work. I'm a little annoyed. There's a couple of pieces that are summonable only to a single lord, that there's no notification of that on the lord card. So this guy has the Imperial contingent, whatever, which he has to play a card to get, and he has the Skull Eye, which he has to play a card to get. There's another leader who also has the Skull Eye. I feel like there should be something. They're distinguished by their odd coloration, but it's kind of it's just a hard thing to cope with. I also found some of the colors of what kind of forces you have, whether you have infantry or militia, hard to determine. It's easy enough with the lords, because their little placards say what they've got with them here, and then say what they've got here, and it says it on the back of the counter as well. The cards are a little thicker, a little stiffer and heavier than I like, but you know what? I think GMT had worse cards for their deluxe games before, and they've kind of gone to something that's a little bit more functional. I didn't have the huge problems that I used to have, and these don't seem to chip up or anything particularly bad. I know I've hacked on these cards before. You have, this is something that I really like that they do. They put out an extra of each wooden lord piece that you might need just in case you lose one. They give you an extra sheet of stickers in case you fuck up or, again, lose one. I mean, that's kind of fucking up. The cards, and this is a consistent problem with Levian campaign, don't always contain, because they split between two things, a capability and an event. They don't always give you as precise and as nailed down information as you might want. And I found that you kind of have to look in the playbook. There's clarifications to all the cards. That usually covers any questions you have. Also contains the historical stuff for each card. You have historical information on the campaign itself, which is very interesting and exciting to read about. Less information on each individual lord than in some of the previous ones. Really good designers and developers notes on this. A playthrough. And some players notes too. The rulebook itself, I struggled with it. Levian Campaign is always a dense rulebook with a lot of information. It uses the GMT numbering style, which sometimes means like a single number or sub number has like a page and a half of information under it. not segmented in any way, so that when you get to the very useful index, it gives you a number and you look and you've got like many paragraphs to read to figure out what the hell you're looking to try to find the piece that you're looking for. And it may not even be there because things are not repeated very often in this, at least in this rule book. And that means that if you have a specific instance you want to find, you might be playing whack-a-mole. Well, you might be playing a follow the trail type thing. Sometimes they'll give you one number to goes to another and gets you where you are. But quite often you're just going to be like, it's not where you expected it to be. This is somewhat worsened, but maybe this has become the new standard for the rule book for Levy and Campaign, by the fact that the Nevsky rules, at the very least, started out with one sort of, like, there was at least one place where a rule moved where it was, and wasn't in a clear place, and it wasn't in a place that I thought was particularly reasonable either. And it's not that way in Nevsky. It's been moved. I don't know. So some restructuring, etc., was done. There are a few little ambiguities in the rules, a few places where I found them not necessarily absolutely clear. But from the other components, you can usually find an answer somewhere. One of the key components of that is the player aid, which is an incredibly dense and rich thing. It gives you all the different commands that you can use. I'm not going to go over the Levy and Campaign system particularly, except that I think it's very historically applicable, and except maybe some little aspects. There's some aspects of pre-planning, some things of the way the capabilities and events interact with each other, where you can kind of control, whether or not an event is available, like bad weather. But anyway, it's less control than you have in a CDG, and you're probably not fixating on that. You have all the different types of forces. It's getting pretty rich in this game. The sequence for the battles, if you can follow through all this dense stuff, you might find some answers to questions you wanted in the rule book. It's not sufficient, though, to replace the rule book. You might have to look things up in the rule book as well. And then you've got the full sequence of play here with this very useful little thing, which again, I think I found some answers there after I needed them, but whatever. You have these little player screens for one of the options. They just let you hide your troops. Nothing fancy about them. But they're thin, but probably stand up fine, Overall, what's my feeling? Some of me thinks that this one's a throwback towards Nevsky, in an environment, a scenario essentially, that I'm more interested in, one that I like, that it's more asymmetrical than any of the others, I think. But I keep coming back to I think there's a heavier burden on this one than maybe any of the other games in this series. Maybe. I don't know. Inferno, I think, was pretty harsh too, but I found myself failing completely in the first game, where both players absolutely failed and could not basically couldn't keep their armies in the field. The supply system and the plotting you have to do with that, in conjunction with the scenario, how the terrain is set up, how those seats are so far from the border, and that you kind of need to be able to get to the border, I found all that made this a much, much harder game to play than most of them. And probably should take the divide out. Now I've not left room for the dice. The dice themselves, these really high quality guys that GMT again puts into their games, at least they're sort of flagship games, but I don't like them very much because they're too big. I just like smaller dice, but that's personal taste. I've gone into that many, many times. I'm very troubled by the difference in the amount of effort you have to put in with the two sides. But also, because I like to find rules of thumb and try to work them, and I can't even find the rule of thumb for the Seljuk side, how they should get away with the rating. On the other hand, I do find myself falling into the wrong tactics, trying to siege instead of ravaging. Ravaging looks like it's not as good as siege because the points go away and whatnot. This game tries to force you into the ravage more than any other, I think. And I don't know. I'm really torn on this as to, is it worth the frustration and the effort for trying to get competent at it? Not good, just competent enough that you can keep your army operating and you can stay in the game against somebody of about equal experience. And I would say this one's pushing my boundaries on that, though. I mean, I don't know. It's so funny because the system plays so deep into my weaknesses of having to pre-plan everything, having to program out the cards and all that, having to know what all the capabilities are and which ones you can use, having to know what capabilities there are when you decide to to muster a lord, all that kind of stuff. It's really, really requires a detailed knowledge of the game to be able to play it kind of competently. A detailed amount of thinking and planning capability as well, which I'm very, very bad at. These are games to study, I think. And that's not something I've been good at doing. Like, even the old Avalon Hill games and everything, where everybody who's playing them is kind of like, wow, you gotta take your 2-to-1 attack on Tobruk on this turn, and that decides the game, and just knowing all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I just like seeing the history play out. I got no interest in being that good. And this is kind of pushing me too deeply into that. You have to play it incredibly. You have to be at a level to basically not have the level that you have to play these games at, and this one in particular, to be able to not have your armies just collapse due to supply screw-ups. Because the supply system requires so much planning in a way that, like, even OCS, like, it puts OCS to shame in terms of how much you have to and can calculate out about what you can do. You have to play at a level to just sort of survive and make it through that I kind of attribute usually to the highly competitive players. But there's certainly a lot more room, because even once I got to a certain level of competence in my second playing, I'm looking and I'm saying, yeah, but I still don't know how to make the Seljuks survive. And the only answer I could kind of come to is get in a combat early and hope for the best. You probably have like a 40% chance of winning a combat that the Byzantines can throw at you in the first year. But if you win that, then it feels like maybe you've even got a slight edge. I don't know. But you might lose the game on that first year, because if you lose Alp Arslan, and you're going to need him in that combat, and you know, like I said, you got maybe a 40% chance of winning the combat. You don't have a 60% chance of losing Alp Arslan. He'll probably get away, but he might not. But anyway, yeah, I found it really, really rough to handle the game. And the system is a tough system for anyone. I would not suggest this as the first game of the series by any means. I think I would suggest playing Nevsky and then this, because all of the others are going to confuse you and distract you from what you need to do in this one, I think. Because those focus more on being able to take fortified locations. There's advantages to it in this. It's just they're really, really hard to take. And with the Seljuks, if you expend your resources on that, you are probably not going to be able to meet your goals. Except for maybe in a key location or whatever. I took Edessa. Seemed like a good idea. Maybe not. Maybe I'm better off not taking it so I can raid it every turn. I don't know. Anyway, I have very mixed feelings on this one. I don't know where to even go with it. Like, I would gladly let someone beat the Romans and play as the Seljuks and try to figure out if I can figure out a way to make them work. But right now I've even got a little bit of fear that the campaign may not be balanced. Maybe the scenarios are. Certainly the first one feels close to it. Like my results were a fairly close game after the end of the first year. And maybe each individual scenario is pretty good, but once you string them all together, you're giving... The Romans have a capability that isn't reflected by what they historically did, possibly. I don't know. I'm just thinking that they can kind of keep all their lords in the field. There's a way to keep your lords in the field by taxing and whatnot, and by stealing plunder from Seljuks who are running away from you. You take the plunder back, and you're able to get coinage that moves slower. Yeah, it's it leaves me in a weird sort of position where I'm just not sure. I felt overwhelmed by it in a way that I haven't felt overwhelmed by the more complicated Levian campaign games, I think, because they fit my kind of lack of planning and let's take things type of idea, rather than the chevauché that I really, really want it represented. Anyway, let's send this up.